Have you ever felt lost, confused, angry? Have you tried expressing yourself with an applique quilt? I did. Here's how I did it.
I started by interfacing my lettering fabric. To draw my letters, I started with 2 parallel lines 4 inches apart, and then sort of freehanded and used a ruler to make sure that the width of each letter was basically the same. So I like to start in the corner, about 1/8 of an inch away from the edges. I'm using a wider stitch than maybe I normally would. I think it looks neater for top stitching. This backing fabric is nice because it has a kind of a stripy print, so it helps me make sure I'm staying in line. I'm taking out my pins as soon as I kind of get some stitches established in that area, because they do add a little bulk, so if you kept them in, you could get little lumps. When I get to a corner, I make sure that I'm just about 1/8 of an inch away from the side I'm approaching, raise my presser foot, and then pivot, drop that presser foot, and then sew. I'm not doing any back stitches at the corner. Raise presser foot and twist. Here it's like not quite 1/8 of an inch away, but if I did another stitch, it would be past the brown fabric. So I'm using my manual crank to move the needle a little bit, and then raising my presser foot and backing it up a little so it lands right where I want it to. In cases like this where you have a circle inside a letter, like an O or P, R, whatever, you want to sew around the inner circle first. That way, if you make any errors, it's easier to correct for it and kind of smooth out everything before you sew the outside. I'm going to use the backing as a template to cut some batting. But when I cut the batting, I want a little bit of extra space on all sides. So now I have 3 pieces: a backing, a batting, and a front piece. They all have the same bottom, but the top on this front piece has this extra fold over. I folded it over 1/2 inch and then 1/2 inch to hide that raw edge. And then I folded that over 2.5 inches, 2.25 inches maybe. And that is going to go over my back piece. The batting just gives a bit of extra structure. It'll look just kind of like a piece of fabric, but if you just hung a piece of fabric, it wouldn't look so nice. I'm holding down my front piece with some weights, and then I'm going to layer on my batting. I'm putting it right up to the fold line. Backing again right up to just below the fold line, so when it folds over it doesn't create any weirdness. So I think that I'm gonna just do that stitch first to kind of get everything to lie in place nicely, and then I will take it back to my iron and make sure the batting is nice and smooth before quilting everything in place. I'm going to take that over to my sewing machine and just sew like 1/4 of an inch from the top. I'm also going to go ahead and put pins further down here. I think that'll help keep things in order, even though I'm just sewing up here. After sewing that top line and ironing everything really neatly, I started my quilting. I didn't like the idea of stitches running across my letters, so I decided not to stitch over them. This, of course, required that as I approached each letter, I stopped, did some back stitches, raised my needle, skipped over the portion of the letter, dropped my needle again, back stitched, sewed until I met another letter or another part of that same letter, back stitched, and then did that whole thing over and over again. It was clunky and not as easy as just sewing straight across, but I think the look is much better. I then had to trim all the bits that stretched across letters. I trimmed all my sides so that my backing, batting, and top piece were all nice and neat. To encase my edges, I used double folded pre-made bias tape in this emerald green color. I pinned it in place all the way around. At each corner, I pinned either side of the corner and then pinched off the extra material and marked where I needed it to kind of fold under, as well as where the point should be. At the sewing machine, I sewed along that marked line to the point that I had marked, and then just tried to mimic that same angle on the back side of the bias tape.